The crack echoed across the frozen lake like a gunshot, and Owen Vance's head snapped up from where he'd been securing his saddlebag, every instinct screaming danger as he saw the dark-haired woman plunge through the ice into the deadly water below. He didn't think. There was no time for thought when death moved that fast. Owen's boots hit the frozen ground running, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid January air of 1885 as he sprinted toward the lake's edge. The woman's scream cut short as the glacial water swallowed her, and Owen could see her hands clawing desperately at the jagged ice, trying to find purchase on the slick surface. Her dark hair spread around her like ink in water, and her face had already begun turning that terrible shade of white that meant the cold was stealing the life from her body. "Hold on," Owen shouted. Though he knew his words were useless, he was already yanking off his heavy coat as he ran, his mind calculating distances and dangers with the same precision he'd used tracking outlaws across 3 territories. The ice groaned beneath his weight as he dropped to his stomach, distributing his body across the frozen surface to keep from breaking through himself. He could see her more clearly now. A young woman maybe in her early 20s, her lips already blue, her movements becoming sluggish as hypothermia set its cruel hooks into her. The hole where she'd fallen through was perhaps 15 feet from the shore, and Owen crawled forward with agonizing slowness, testing each section of ice before putting his weight on it. But when he was still 10 feet away, he saw her hands slip from the edge, saw her face disappear beneath the dark water, and something primal and fierce roared to life in his chest. He lunged forward, and the ice cracked beneath him, but held. Not good enough. Not fast enough. The woman wasn't surfacing, and Owen knew he had seconds, maybe less, before the cold water stopped her heart forever. He pushed himself up to his knees, drew back his fist, and brought it down on the ice with all the force his 6-foot frame could muster. Pain exploded through his knuckles, but the ice fractured. He hit it again and again, his fists breaking through the frozen barrier even as the skin on his hands split and bled. The frigid water bit into his wounds like acid, but Owen didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He smashed through the ice in a straight line toward where the woman had gone under, creating a channel of broken fragments and dark water, his breath coming in harsh gasps that burned his lungs. When he reached the hole where she'd fallen, Owen plunged his arms into the water up to his shoulders, sweeping them through the darkness, searching. His fingers brushed fabric, and he lunged deeper, ignoring the way the cold made his muscles seize, how it felt like knives cutting into his flesh. He caught hold of something solid and pulled with everything he had. Her head broke the surface, and Owen hauled her up and out, dragging her across the broken ice toward shore with one arm, while using the other to pull them both forward. The woman wasn't conscious, her body limp and heavy with waterlogged clothing, but Owen could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing. Barely. His feet found solid ground, and Owen lifted her into his arms, running toward the small stand of trees where his horse waited. His hands were screaming with pain, torn and bleeding and already starting to swell, but he held her tight against his chest, trying to share what little warmth his body could offer. Her lips were blue, her skin like marble, and when he laid her down on the frozen ground, he could barely detect a pulse. "Come on," Owen said, his voice rough and urgent as he began stripping off her wet coat and dress. There was no room for modesty when death stood this close. He'd seen men die from cold water in the war, had watched hypothermia take soldiers who'd survived bullets and bayonets, and he'd be damned if he let this woman become another casualty. He wrapped her in his dry coat and the blanket from his bedroll, then pulled her against his chest, sharing his body heat while he rubbed her arms and back, trying to get her blood moving again. "Stay with me," he murmured against her wet hair. "Don't you dare give up." She made a small sound, something between a whimper and a gasp, and Owen felt a surge of hope so intense it nearly knocked him breathless. He held her tighter, continuing to rub warmth back into her frozen limbs, talking to her in a low, steady voice about anything and everything. He told her about his horse, about the ranch he was riding to, about the terrible coffee he'd had that morning at the last town. Anything to keep her connected to the world of the living. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, color began returning to her face. Her breathing deepened, and the terrible rigidity left her muscles. Owen didn't let go. He held her against him as minutes stretched into what felt like hours until finally her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, and they fixed on his face with an expression of pure confusion. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. "You're safe," Owen said quickly. "You went through the ice, but you're safe now. Don't try to talk yet." She stared at him for a long moment, and he watched as memory returned, saw the fear flash across her features, followed by understanding. Her hand moved beneath the blanket, and she realized she was wearing only her undergarments beneath his coat. Color flooded her cheeks, but she didn't pull away from him. "My dress," she whispered. "Wet," Owen said. "Had to get it off you. The cold would have killed you otherwise." He nodded toward where he'd spread her clothing across some low branches. "They'll dry soon enough in this wind." She closed her eyes, and for a moment Owen thought she might have passed out again, but then she spoke, her voice still barely audible. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die." "What were you doing out on that lake?" The question came out harsher than Owen intended, but the fear was still too fresh. The image of her disappearing beneath the ice too vivid. "Shortcut," she said, opening her eyes again. "I was trying to get home before dark. My father's ranch is on the other side. I've crossed that lake 100 times. "Not in January, you haven't," Owen said. "Not with a warm spell weakening the ice. I know that now." There was a hint of spirit in her voice despite her weakness, and Owen found himself almost smiling. Almost. His hands chose that moment to remind him of their existence, and he hissed in pain as he tried to flex his fingers. The woman's eyes went wide. "Your hands. Oh, God. Your hands." She pulled one of his hands from beneath the blanket, and Owen saw her face go pale again as she took in the torn skin, the swelling, the blood that had frozen in dark streaks across his knuckles. "What did you do?" "Broke through the ice," Owen said simply. "You'd gone under. Didn't have time to find something else to use." She stared at him like he'd grown a second head, her honey-colored eyes shimmering with sudden tears. "You broke through the ice with your bare hands? To save me?" Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the way she was looking at him, like he'd done something heroic instead of just human. "Couldn't just let you drown." "Most people would have," she said softly. "Most people would have watched from shore and said it was too dangerous, too risky." She was still holding his hand, and now she lifted it carefully, examining the damage. "These need to be treated. You could lose fingers if infection sets in." "I'll be fine." "You will not be fine," she said with surprising firmness. "My father's ranch is less than a mile from here if we circle around the lake. He has medical supplies, and my mother was a nurse before she married him. Please, it's the least I can do after you saved my life." Owen wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he had places to be and couldn't afford delays, but the truth was his hands hurt like hell, and he had no medical supplies of his own. And there was something about this woman, something that made him want to stay, to make sure she really was all right. "What's your name?" he asked. "Beatrice Hartwell," she said, "but everyone calls me Bea." "Owen Vance." He paused, then added, "We should wait a bit longer before we move. Make sure you're warm enough for the ride." Bea nodded, settling back against his chest with a trust that did strange things to Owen's heartbeat. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind whistle through the bare branches above them and the distant crack of ice settling on the lake. Owen tried not to think about how right it felt to hold her, how her hair smelled like lake water, and something floral he couldn't quite identify, how small and fragile she'd felt when he'd pulled her from the water. He'd been alone for a long time, ever since the war had ended, and he'd come west looking for a fresh start. Alone by choice, because caring about people meant risking loss, and Owen had lost enough for one lifetime. But sitting here with this woman in his arms, feeling her warmth gradually return, hearing her breathing steady and strong, he felt something shift inside him. Something he thought had died on a battlefield in Virginia all those years ago. "I think I can ride now," Bea said eventually, her voice much stronger. "If you help me get dressed." Owen turned his back while she changed, though he stayed close in case she grew dizzy. When she told him she was decent, he turned to find her looking considerably more put together, though her dress was still damp in places, and she was shivering. He helped her onto his horse and swung up behind her, wrapping his arms around her to keep her steady and share his warmth. The ride to the Hartwell ranch took about 20 minutes, following a worn path that skirted the lake's edge. Bea directed him with quiet instructions, and Owen found himself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, every time she leaned back against him. He told himself it was just the aftermath of crisis, the natural bond that formed between people who'd faced death together, but he knew he was lying. The Hartwell ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, a sprawling property with a well-maintained house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Owen could see cattle dotting the winter-brown hills beyond. It was a prosperous spread, the kind that spoke of years of hard work and careful management. They were spotted before they reached the house. A tall man with graying hair came striding out of the barn, his face creasing with concern when he saw his daughter riding double with a stranger. "Bea, what happened?" "I fell through the ice on Miller's Lake," Bea called out as Owen reined in his horse. "And Papa, this is Owen Vance. He saved my life." The transformation in her father's face was immediate. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a complex mixture of gratitude, fear, and residual panic. He reached up to help Bea down, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, girl, are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Papa. Cold, but fine. Mr. Vance got me out in time." Bea pulled back and gestured to Owen, who was dismounting with some difficulty, his injured hands making it hard to grip the reins. "But he hurt himself badly saving me. He needs medical attention." Her father turned to Owen, and there were tears in the older man's eyes when he extended his hand, then saw the state of Owen's hands and dropped his arm. "Mr. Vance, George Hartwell, I don't have words sufficient to thank you for what you did." "No thanks necessary," Owen said. "Anyone would have done the same." "That's not true, and you know it," Bea interjected. She'd moved to Owen's side and was looking up at him with an expression that made his chest tight. "He broke through the ice with his bare hands when I went under, Mr. Hartwell. I'd be dead if not for him." George Hartwell's eyes widened as he looked at Owen's hands, really looked at them, and saw the extent of the damage. "Good Lord, come inside, both of you. Martha!" he called toward the house. "Martha, come quick!" The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Owen was ushered into the warm kitchen, where a plump woman with kind eyes and graying blonde hair took one look at his hands and immediately took charge. Martha Hartwell had indeed been a nurse, and she worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wounds, applying salve, and wrapping his hands in clean bandages. She scolded him gently for his recklessness even as tears slipped down her cheeks, and Owen understood that she was seeing what could have happened to her daughter, how close they'd come to losing her. Meanwhile, Bea had been sent upstairs to change into dry clothes and warm up properly. When she came back down, her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, drying in waves, and she'd changed into a simple blue dress that somehow made her honey-colored eyes even more striking. Owen found he couldn't stop looking at her. "You'll stay for dinner," George said, and it wasn't a question. "Stay the night, in fact. It's the least we can do, and besides, you shouldn't be riding anywhere with your hands in that condition." Owen wanted to refuse, to put distance between himself and the feelings that were growing stronger with every moment he spent in Bea's presence. But Martha was already setting another place at the table, and Bea was looking at him with such hope in her eyes that he found himself nodding instead. Dinner was a warm, lively affair despite the scare that had preceded it. George and Martha had 3 children. Bea, who Owen learned was 22 years old and helped run the ranch alongside her father, a younger brother named Thomas, who was away in San Antonio learning the cattle business, and a sister named Claire, who was married and living in Austin. The Hartwells had built their ranch from nothing 20 years ago, arriving in Texas with just a wagon and a dream, and they'd made it thrive through determination and hard work. Owen found himself talking more than he had in months, telling them about his own past. He'd been a cavalry officer during the war, had mustered out in 1865 with nothing but his horse and his service revolver. He'd drifted west, working as a ranch hand, a deputy marshal for a while, anything that would keep him moving and not thinking too much about the past. Most recently, he'd been hired to deliver some horses to a ranch outside of Fort Davis, which was where he'd been heading when he'd spotted Bea on the ice. Fort Davis is 2 days' ride from here, George said thoughtfully. You'll need time for those hands to heal before you can handle horses properly. Stay here a few days, let Martha take care of you, and then we'll send you on your way with supplies for the journey. I couldn't impose, Owen started, but Martha cut him off. Young man, you saved our daughter's life. You broke your hands saving her. The least we can do is offer you hospitality while you heal. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument, and Owen recognized the steel beneath her gentle exterior. This was a woman who'd survived the hardships of frontier life, who'd raised a family in wild country, and she wasn't about to take no for an answer. Besides, Bea added quietly, I'd like the chance to properly thank you, to get to know the man who risked so much for a stranger. Her eyes met his across the table, and Owen felt something pass between them, some current of understanding or connection that made the rest of the room fade away. He saw her cheeks flush, saw her quickly look down at her plate, and he knew she'd felt it too. All right, he heard himself say, a few days. Thank you. That night, Owen lay in a comfortable bed in the Hartwells' guest room, his bandaged hands resting on his chest, and stared at the ceiling. He could hear the house settling around him, the creak of wood and the whisper of wind against the windows. It was peaceful in a way he hadn't experienced in years, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Bea disappearing beneath the ice, felt the terror of thinking he might be too late. And then he'd remember the moment she'd opened her eyes and looked at him, the trust in her gaze, the warmth of her body against his. He was in trouble. He'd known it the moment he'd pulled her from the water, had felt it grow stronger with every hour they'd spent together. Owen Vance had spent a decade building walls around his heart, keeping himself distant and detached, but somehow this woman had slipped through his defenses without even trying. And the worst part was he didn't want to fight it. For the first time in years, he wanted to stay to see where this feeling might lead, but what did he have to offer her? He was a drifter with no home, no prospects beyond the few dollars he'd earned delivering horses. Bea deserved better than a man who lived out of saddlebags, who carried his past like a weight around his neck. She deserved stability, security, a future. Owen turned onto his side, ignoring the protest from his injured hands, and forced his eyes closed. He'd stay a few days to heal, he told himself. That was all. Then he'd ride on to Fort Davis, deliver the horses, and put Beatrice Hartwell out of his mind. It was the right thing to do, the smart thing. He just wished it didn't feel so much like running away. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day where the sky was an impossible shade of blue and the sun seemed to give light without warmth. Owen woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and when he made his way downstairs, he found Martha already busy in the kitchen and George heading out to check on the cattle. Bea's in the barn, Martha said, with a knowing smile when she caught Owen looking around. She's been up since dawn. That girl can't sit still to save her life. Owen found himself walking toward the barn before he'd consciously decided to seek her out. The building was warm and dim, filled with the comforting smell of hay and horses, and he spotted Bea immediately. She was in one of the stalls, brushing down a pretty bay mare with long, steady strokes. She'd pinned her dark hair back, but curls had already escaped to frame her face, and there was a contentment in her expression that made her beautiful. "Morning," Owen said, and Bea turned with a smile that lit up her whole face. "Good morning. How are your hands?" "Sore," he admitted. "But your mother did good work. They'll heal." Bea set down the brush and came to the stall door, her eyes serious as she looked up at him. "Owen, I've been thinking about what you did yesterday, about how you risked your life for mine. I don't think you understand how extraordinary that was. I understand that I couldn't stand by and watch you die, but you could have. Most people would have." She reached out as if to touch his hand, then stopped herself, clearly afraid of hurting him. "You didn't know me. You had no obligation to me. But you didn't hesitate. You just acted." "Sometimes thinking gets people killed," Owen said. "Sometimes you just have to do what's right and deal with the consequences later." "Is that what the war taught you?" The question surprised him. Not many people asked about the war, and Owen rarely volunteered information about those years. But there was genuine curiosity in Bea's eyes, not morbid fascination, and he found himself wanting to answer honestly. "The war taught me a lot of things," he said slowly. "Most of them bad. But yeah, it taught me that hesitation can be the difference between life and death. It taught me to act on instinct, to trust my gut." He paused, then added, "It also taught me that life is fragile and precious, and that every moment matters. So when I saw you go through that ice, there was no decision to make. There was just you drowning and me able to help." Bea was quiet for a moment, her eyes shimmering with emotion. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I'm glad you were there. I'm glad you're the kind of man who would do what you did. And I'm glad you're here now, even if it's just for a few days." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Owen felt his carefully constructed resolve beginning to crumble. He should step back, should put distance between them, but instead he found himself moving closer. "Bea," he started, but she shook her head. "You don't have to say anything, I just wanted you to know." She gave him a small smile, then gestured to the mare. "This is Juniper. She's my horse. Would you like to meet her properly?" Owen spent the rest of the morning in the barn with Bea, meeting the various horses and learning about the ranch. She was knowledgeable and passionate when she talked about the animals and the land, and Owen found himself fascinated by more than just her words. He loved the way her eyes lit up when she talked about a particularly clever horse, the way she moved with easy confidence through the barn, the sound of her laughter when one of the barn cats tried to climb into the feed bucket. They talked about everything and nothing. Bea told him about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about the summer when a drought had nearly destroyed them, and how they'd survived through sheer stubbornness. Owen found himself sharing stories too, things he hadn't talked about in years. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents who died of fever when he was 16, about the horse he'd had during the war that had saved his life more times than he could count. It felt natural talking to her, easy in a way Owen had forgotten human connection could be. With Bea, he didn't have to pretend to be anything other than what he was. She didn't look at him with fear when he mentioned the war, didn't treat him like he was damaged or dangerous. She just listened, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own stories in return. The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Owen's hands healed slowly, and Martha changed his bandages twice daily, clucking over him like a mother hen. George taught him about the ranch's operations and seemed impressed by Owen's knowledge of horses and cattle, but it was the time with Bea that Owen found himself living for. They fell into a routine without discussing it. Mornings in the barn, working side by side to care for the horses. Afternoons riding the property, with Bea showing him the boundaries of the ranch and the places she loved best. Evenings around the dinner table with her parents, sharing meals and stories and laughter. And late at night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Owen and Bea would sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, talking until the cold drove them inside. On the fourth night, Bea asked him about his plans. They were sitting on the porch steps, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, and her question caught Owen off guard. I mean, after Fort Davis, she clarified. After you deliver the horses, where will you go? Owen was silent for a long moment. The truth was he didn't know. He'd been drifting for so long that the idea of a destination beyond the next job felt foreign. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Don't you ever want to settle down, have a place of your own? I did once, Owen said quietly. Long time ago. Before the war, I thought I'd go back to Missouri, take over my family's farm. But there was nothing to go back to after my parents died. The farm was sold for debts. And after the war, he trailed off, struggling to put into words the restlessness that had driven him west. After the war, I couldn't imagine staying in one place. It felt like standing still meant remembering, and remembering hurt too much. Bee's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers carefully avoiding his healing wounds. And now? Now I'm starting to think maybe running isn't the answer. The words came out before Owen could stop them, before he could think better of being so honest. Maybe there are things worth staying for. He felt, rather than saw, Bee turn to look at him. Her hand tightened on his, and when she spoke, there was a tremor in her voice. Owen, these past few days with you have been the happiest I've had in a long time, maybe ever. And I know you have to leave. I know you have obligations, but I need you to know that I don't want you to go. Owen's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. He turned to face her, and in the dim light spilling from the kitchen window, he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope and fear warring on her face. Bee, I'm not the kind of man you should want. I have nothing to offer you, no home, no prospects, nothing but a horse and a past full of ghosts. That's not true, Bee said fiercely. You have integrity, you have courage, you have kindness. Those things matter more than land or money. They matter to me. Your father would never approve. My father already approves of you more than any man I've ever known. He told me yesterday that you have the kind of character a person can build a life on. She moved closer, and Owen could smell the lavender soap she used, could feel the warmth of her breath. I'm not asking you for promises. Owen, I'm not asking you to give up your life or change who you are. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe you found a place where you could belong, that maybe I could be worth staying for. Owen knew he should pull away, should remind her of all the reasons this was a bad idea, but instead he found himself cupping her face with his bandaged hands, tilting her chin up so he could see her eyes. You'd be worth staying for, he said roughly. You'd be worth anything. That's what scares me. I haven't cared about anyone in so long, and caring about you feels like jumping off a cliff, like taking the biggest risk of my life. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards, Bee whispered. You taught me that when you broke through the ice for me. You didn't know if you'd save me or if we'd both die. You just knew you had to try. And then she was kissing him. Or maybe he was kissing her. And Owen stopped thinking altogether. Her lips were soft and warm against his. And when she sighed into his mouth, he felt something inside him break open. Some last barrier between who he'd been and who he might become. He kissed her like a drowning man finding air, like a man who'd been lost finding home. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen knew there was no going back. I love you, he said, the words tumbling out unplanned but utterly true. I know it's too soon. I know it makes no sense, but I love you, Beatrice Hartwell. I think I started loving you the moment I pulled you from that water and you opened your eyes and looked at me like I'd hung the moon. Bee laughed, and there were tears on her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or shock or anything but love, but I can't deny it anymore. I love you, Owen Vance. I want you to stay. Please stay. I have to deliver those horses, Owen said, but he was already thinking about coming back. It's a job I agreed to do? I know. I wouldn't expect you to break your word. Bea took a shaky breath. But after? Could you come back? Could you consider making a life here, with me? Owen thought about the years he'd spent drifting, the loneliness he'd carried like a second skin, the emptiness that had become so familiar he'd almost forgotten it was there. And then he thought about the past few days, about waking up with purpose, about having someone to talk to who really listened, about the way his heart felt fuller and lighter at the same time when he was with Bea. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll come back," he said. "I swear to you I'll deliver those horses and I'll come back. If you'll have me, if your parents will accept me, I want to stay. I want to build a life here with you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, longer and deeper than the first, and when they finally went inside hand in hand, Owen felt like a different man than the one who'd been riding toward Fort Davis 5 days ago. That man had been running from his past, avoiding connection, choosing solitude over the risk of loss. This man was choosing love, choosing to risk everything for the chance at happiness with the woman who'd somehow become his entire world in less than a week. The next morning, Owen announced his intention to leave for Fort Davis. His hands were healing well enough to handle reins and rope, and he couldn't put off his obligation any longer. But the mood around the breakfast table wasn't somber. George and Martha had clearly noticed the change between their daughter and their guest, and if they had concerns about the speed of the developing relationship, they kept them to themselves. "You'll come back," George said, and it was a statement, not a question. "Bea told us this morning. You'll deliver your horses, and then you'll come back." "If you'll have me, sir," Owen said. "I know I don't have much to offer, but I love your daughter. I'll work hard. I'll help build this ranch into something even greater than it is, and I'll spend every day making sure she knows she made the right choice." George studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Owen shook it carefully, mindful of his healing wounds, and saw approval in the older man's eyes. "We'd be honored to have you as part of this family. You've already proven your character, son. The rest is just details we can work out when you return." Martha hugged him tightly, then pressed a package of food into his hands for the journey. "You take care of yourself," she said firmly. "And don't you dare make my daughter wait too long. 2 weeks. You deliver those horses and you come straight back, you hear me?" "Yes, madam," Owen said, and he meant it. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Bea. She walked with him to where his horse was saddled and ready, and they stood together in the cold morning air, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Owen tilted her face up and kissed her, pouring all his love and promise into it. 2 weeks, he said against her lips. "I'll be back in 2 weeks." "I'll be waiting," Bea said. "Be safe, Owen. Come back to me." He rode away without looking back, afraid that if he saw her standing there watching him leave, he'd turn around and never go. The journey to Fort Davis took 2 days, just as George had predicted, and Owen used the time to think about his future. For the first time in a decade, he had something to plan for, something to look forward to beyond just surviving another day. Fort Davis was a military outpost in the mountains, and the ranch where Owen was to deliver the horses was another half-day's ride beyond it. The owner, a gruff man named Callahan, was pleased with the horses and paid Owen promptly. He offered Owen work, said he could use a man with his skills, but Owen politely declined. He had somewhere to be, someone waiting for him, and he wasn't about to waste time. He stopped in Fort Davis just long enough to buy supplies and one other thing, something he'd been thinking about since he'd left the Hartwell ranch. The general store had a small selection of jewelry, and Owen spent a good portion of his earnings on a simple gold ring with a small garnet stone. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest and strong, and he thought Bea would love it. The return journey felt longer than the trip out, every mile between him and Bea like a physical weight. Owen pushed his horse as hard as he dared, camping only when darkness made travel dangerous, and eating in the saddle to save time. He'd promised 2 weeks, but he was determined to make it back in less if he could. 13 days after leaving the Hartwell ranch, Owen crested the rise that overlooked the property. It was late afternoon, and the winter sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He could see smoke rising from the chimney, cattle grazing on the hills, and a figure in the yard who stopped moving and stared toward him. Even at this distance, Owen knew it was Bea. He urged his horse into a gallop. eating up the distance between them, and saw her start running toward him. They met halfway, and Owen barely had time to dismount before she was in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "You came back," she said against his chest. "You came back early." "I couldn't stay away," Owen said, holding her tight. 2 weeks felt like forever. I had to get back to you. "I missed you so much," Bea said, pulling back to look up at him. "Every day felt like a week. I kept watching the road, hoping to see you." Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box he'd been carrying. "I bought you something. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." He opened the box, revealing the ring, and watched Bea's eyes go wide. "Beatrice Hartwell, I know we haven't known each other long, and I know I should probably wait and court you properly, but I've never been good at doing things the conventional way. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. Will you marry me?" Bea's hand flew to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. For a moment that felt like an eternity, she didn't speak, and Owen felt panic begin to creep in. Had he moved too fast? Had he misread everything between them? Then she was nodding, laughing through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course, yes, I love you, Owen. I've been yours since the moment you pulled me from that water." Owen slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then they were kissing again, oblivious to the cold wind and the approaching darkness and everything except each other. When they finally pulled apart, Owen saw George and Martha standing on the porch, watching with matching smiles. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. There was a wedding to plan, though Bea insisted she wanted something simple and soon. "I've already waited 22 years to find you," she told Owen. "I'm not waiting months for a fancy ceremony." They were married on a Sunday in February in the small church in the nearest town. It was a modest affair, just family and close friends. But to Owen it felt like the most important day of his life. Bea wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and she looked so beautiful walking down the aisle that Owen felt his throat tighten with emotion. When the preacher asked if he would take Beatrice as his wife, to love and cherish her for all his days, Owen's voice was strong and clear. "I will." And when Bea promised the same, looking up at him with those honey-colored eyes full of love and trust and promise, Owen felt the last piece of his broken heart click back into place. He'd spent so many years running from his past, from pain and loss and the fear of caring too much. But standing here with Bea, promising forever, he understood that the real courage wasn't in avoiding love. It was in embracing it, despite all the risks. Despite knowing that happiness could be lost, the courage was in choosing to try anyway. They kissed to seal their vows, and the small congregation erupted in applause. George shook Owen's hand with tears in his eyes, and Martha hugged them both, whispering blessings and advice. And then they were outside in the cold February air, climbing into a borrowed wagon, heading back to the ranch that was now Owen's home. The first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Owen threw himself into ranch work with the same intensity he'd once applied to cavalry drills, learning the rhythms of cattle ranching and the particular challenges of the Texas landscape. George was a patient teacher, and Owen found he had a knack for the work. More than that, he found he loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about working with his hands, about building something lasting, about going to bed exhausted every night knowing he'd accomplished something real. But the best part of every day was Bea, coming in from the fields to find her waiting with a smile, sitting across from her at dinner, their feet tangled under the table. Lying beside her at night in the small house George had helped them build on the edge of the property, listening to her breathe and marveling that she was his wife. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared dreams and fears and hopes for the future. They learned each other's bodies and souls with equal passion, discovering the rhythms and patterns that would shape their life together. Spring came, and with it new life. The cattle gave birth to healthy calves, the grass greened up after the winter brown, and Bea announced she was pregnant. Owen was terrified and elated in equal measure, But Bee just laughed at his nervousness and told him he was going to be a wonderful father. "How do you know?" he asked, holding her close. "Because you're a wonderful husband," she said simply. "Because you're kind and patient and brave. Because you love fiercely when you let yourself. Our child will be lucky to have you." Their son was born in late December, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's honey-colored eyes. They named him Samuel, after Owen's father, and from the moment Owen held his son for the first time, he understood a depth of love he'd never imagined possible. This tiny, perfect creature depended on him completely, trusted him utterly, and Owen vowed that he would never let him down. Watching Bee with Samuel was almost overwhelming. She was a natural mother, patient and loving, and seeing her nurse their son, or sing him lullabies, or simply hold him while he slept made Owen fall in love with her all over again every single day. They were a family now, the three of them, and it was everything Owen had never dared to hope for. The ranch prospered over the next few years. George began to slow down, his joints aching more in the cold months, and Owen gradually took over more of the daily operations. It was a natural transition, and George seemed content to step back and watch the younger man lead. Owen proved himself a capable rancher, making smart decisions about breeding stock and grazing rotation, negotiating good prices for their cattle in San Antonio. The Hartwell Ranch gained a reputation for quality stock and honest dealings, and their fortunes grew. When Samuel was 2, Bee became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny girl with dark curls and a stubborn streak that reminded Owen of her mother. They named her Rose, and Samuel adored his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. Owen built additions onto their house to accommodate their growing family, and George and Martha became doting grandparents, always ready to watch the children so Owen and Bee could have time alone together. Those stolen moments became precious. Sometimes they'd ride out to the lake where they'd first met, though Owen never looked at that stretch of ice without remembering the terror of seeing Bee disappear beneath the surface. Other times they'd simply sit on their porch after the children were asleep, holding hands and watching the stars, talking about their days and their dreams. "Are you happy?" Bee asked one evening, about 5 years into their marriage. "Truly happy?" Owen turned to look at her. This woman who'd changed his entire life, who'd given him purpose and love and a reason to believe in tomorrow. "I didn't know what happiness was until I met you," he said honestly. "Every day with you feels like a gift I don't quite deserve, but am grateful for anyway." "You deserve it," Bee said fiercely. "You deserve all of it, Owen. You're a good man, the best man I know." When Thomas, Bee's younger brother, finally returned from San Antonio, he found the ranch transformed. Owen and Thomas hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of horses and whiskey, and Thomas fit easily into the operations. George officially made Owen a partner in the ranch, signing over a third of the property to him, and Owen felt the weight of that trust like a sacred responsibility. George passed away quietly in his sleep when Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3. It was the natural end of a life well lived, but the grief hit the family hard. Owen held Bee while she cried, and he made sure the children understood that Grandpa had loved them, that he'd been proud of them, that his memory would live on in stories and the land he'd built. Martha moved into the main house with them after George's death, and she became an even more integral part of their daily lives, teaching the children to read and helping Bee with the endless work of running a household. Time moved on, as it always does. Samuel grew tall and serious, with Owen's steady nature and Bee's quick mind. He loved the horses more than the cattle, and Owen began teaching him everything he knew about breeding and training. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees or racing her pony or getting into mischief, and she had both her parents wrapped around her little finger. When Samuel was 8 and Rose was 6, Bee became pregnant one more time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and Owen worried constantly, but Bee remained calm and confident. "I'm fine," she'd tell him whenever he fretted. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass. Their third child, another son they named Henry, was born on a hot summer day in August. He was a big baby, healthy and loud, and Owen couldn't help but think back to that frozen day in January when he'd pulled Bea from the ice. All of this, everything they'd built together, every moment of joy and love, had started with that single act of desperate courage. If he'd hesitated, if he'd been afraid, none of this would exist. Samuel and Rose and Henry would never have been born. The life he cherished would have remained nothing but a possibility. "What are you thinking about, Chimio?" Bea asked from the bed, where she held their newborn son. Owen sat beside her, careful not to jostle them, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life would be if I hadn't been riding past Miller's Lake that day." "Do you ever regret it?" Bea asked softly. "The life you gave up? The freedom of drifting wherever you wanted?" "Never," Owen said without hesitation. "Not for a single second." "That wasn't freedom, Bea. That was running. This is freedom. This life we've built, this family, this home. Waking up next to you every morning and knowing I belong somewhere, that I matter to someone. There's nothing I regret except all the years I wasted before I found you." Bea's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You found me just when I needed you most. You saved me in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Owen corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to stop running, to believe in tomorrow. You gave me a home." As the years continued to pass, the Hartwell Ranch became one of the most successful operations in that part of Texas. Owen's reputation as a horseman spread, and people came from miles around to buy breeding stock or have him train their difficult animals. Samuel proved to have inherited his father's gift with horses, and by the time he was 15, he was working alongside Owen as an equal partner. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman, spirited and independent, who could rope a steer as well as any ranch hand, and who had a line of suitors that made Owen's head spin. He was, Bea teased him mercilessly, absolutely impossible about Rose's boyfriends, finding fault with every young man who came calling. "You're going to drive her away if you're not careful," Bea warned. "I just want to make sure she finds someone worthy of her," Owen protested. "Someone like you mean," Bea said with a knowing smile. "Someone who would break ice with his bare hands to save her?" "Exactly." Eventually, Rose did find someone Owen could accept, a young rancher from a neighboring property who treated her with respect and genuine affection. The wedding was a grand affair, much bigger than Owen and Bea's had been, and Owen cried when he walked his daughter down the aisle. Bea squeezed his hand during the ceremony, and he knew she was thinking the same thing he was, how fast time had moved, how their little girl had grown into a woman. Henry turned out to be the scholar of the family. He loved books more than horses, mathematics more than cattle, and when he was 17, he announced his intention to go to college in Austin. Owen and Bea supported his dreams, though it was hard to watch another child leave home. But they were proud of him, of all their children, of the people they'd become. When Owen turned 50, Bea threw him a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. Standing in the barn that had been decorated for the occasion, surrounded by people he'd come to know and care about over the decades, Owen felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He pulled Bea aside, away from the noise and celebration, and held her close. 25 years, he murmured. "Has it really been 25 years since I pulled you from that lake?" 25 years since you saved my life and changed yours, Mark Sucker," Bea confirmed. She looked up at him, and he saw silver threading through her dark hair, fine lines around her eyes and mouth, and he thought she'd never been more beautiful. "Any regrets yet?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner," Owen said, and kissed her the way he had on their wedding day, with all the love and passion and promise that had sustained them through 2.5 decades. Martha lived to see all her grandchildren married and most of her great-grandchildren born. She passed away peacefully at 83, surrounded by family, and Owen grieved for the woman who'd welcomed him so completely into her family, who'd treated him like a son from the very beginning. At the funeral, he spoke about her kindness, her strength and her wisdom, and there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Thomas never married, content to be the favorite uncle and to run his portion of the ranch with competent efficiency. He and Owen remained close friends as well as business partners, spending countless evenings on the porch arguing good-naturedly about everything from politics to cattle breeding to the best way to break a green horse. As Owen grew older, he began to slow down, much as George had. His hands, broken all those years ago saving Bee, ached in the cold weather, and he couldn't work as long or as hard as he once had. But he didn't mind. Samuel had taken over most of the daily operations, and Owen was content to be a consultant and advisor, to spend more time with Bee and their growing number of grandchildren. They'd sit on the porch of the house Owen had built, watching the sun set over land they'd worked for decades, and talk about their life together. They'd remember the early days, the struggles and triumphs, the births and deaths, the countless small moments that had woven together to create their history, and every time, without fail, they'd talk about that day on the frozen lake. "What were you thinking?" Bee would ask, "when you saw me go through the ice?" And Owen would always answer the same way. "I was thinking that I couldn't let you die. I was thinking that I had to save you no matter what it cost me." "You couldn't have known," Bee would say softly. "You couldn't have known that saving me would lead to all of this, the life we've built, the children we've raised, the love we've shared." "Maybe not," Owen would agree, "but I think some part of me knew, even then, that you were going to matter, that you were going to change everything." On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a massive celebration. The ranch was filled with people. 3 generations of family and friends gathering to honor the love story that had started with such drama and grown into something solid and lasting. Owen and Bee stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, and surveyed the crowd. "We did good," Bee said quietly. "We did better than good," Owen corrected. "We built something beautiful, something lasting." That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, Owen and Bee lay in bed together holding hands in the darkness. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work and life. But when Owen looked at Bee, he still saw the young woman he'd pulled from the frozen lake. He still felt the same surge of love and protectiveness, the same desperate need to keep her safe and happy. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I've loved you every single day for 50 years, and I'll love you every day for however long we have left." "And I love you," Bee replied. "You're still my hero, Owen Vance, the brave cowboy who broke ice with his fist to save me, my husband, my partner, my heart." They drifted off to sleep like that, hands clasped, hearts joined, 2 lives so thoroughly intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And if Owen dreamed that night of a frozen lake and a drowning woman in the moment when everything changed, it was a good dream. A dream full of gratitude and wonder that he'd been in the right place at the right time to save the woman who would become his whole world. Owen Vance lived to be 82 years old, and every one of those years after meeting Bee was full of purpose and meaning. He passed away peacefully in the spring, with Bee holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were to his wife, the woman he'd loved for more than half a century. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me save you, for saving me right back." Bee lived another 5 years after Owen died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never wanted to. How could she, when she'd had the great love of her life? She'd tell anyone who would listen about the day a brave cowboy had broken through ice to pull her from a frozen lake, and how that single act of courage had led to a lifetime of happiness. When she passed away also in the spring, her children buried her beside Owen on the hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. The tombstone was simple, just their names and dates and one line: he saved her and she saved him. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through Samuel's line, and the story of Owen and Bee became family legend. great, great-grandchildren would walk past the frozen lake in winter and imagine that long-ago day when a cowboy had broken ice with his bare hands to save a drowning woman. They'd touch the old tombstone on the hill and wonder at the kind of love that could last 50 years and beyond. And sometimes, on quiet winter evenings when the wind whispered across the frozen landscape, it almost seemed like you could hear it. The crack of breaking ice, the splash of water, and the sound of a man's voice saying, "Hold on, I've got you." Because some love stories, the really good ones, never truly end. They echo through time, inspiring new generations, reminding people that courage and love and choosing to care despite the risks are the things that make life worth living. Owen and Bee's story was one of those stories, a testament to the power of one moment, one choice, one desperate act of bravery that changed everything. He'd been riding toward Fort Davis, drifting through life with no real direction or purpose. She'd been taking a shortcut across a frozen lake, hurrying home before dark. Neither of them could have known that their paths were about to collide, that a tragedy would become the beginning of the greatest love either would ever know. But that's how the best stories often begin, with chance and choice, and the willingness to risk everything for someone else. Owen Vance broke ice with his fist to save Beatrice Hartwell, and in doing so, he saved himself. He found home in her arms, purpose in their shared life, and love that would endure long after both of them had returned to the earth they'd worked for so many years. Their children made sure the story was never forgotten. They told it to their children, who told it to theirs, who told it to theirs. And each generation understood the lesson woven into the tale, that love is worth fighting for, that courage can come in unexpected moments, and that sometimes the life you're meant to live begins with a single choice to care, to act, to save someone who needs saving. The lake is still there, freezing over every winter, and the ranch still stands on the hill above it. Different people work the land now, but the bones of what Owen and Bee built remain. The original barn, the main house where they raised their family, the small home where they spent their early years as newlyweds. These structures are cared for and maintained, honored as the foundation of something that's lasted for more than a century. And on cold winter days when ice forms on Miller's Lake and the wind howls across the Texas landscape, you can almost feel them there. The cowboy with broken hands and a fierce heart, and the woman who loved him for saving her life and staying to build a future. They're in the land, in the story, in the legacy of love and courage they left behind. Their love story began with ice and water and desperate fear, but it grew into something warm and lasting and beautiful. It proved that the best things in life often come from the moments when we stop thinking about ourselves and act from pure instinct to help another human being. Owen didn't save Bee because he expected anything in return. He saved her because it was right, because he couldn't do anything else, because something in him recognized something in her even before they'd ever spoken. And that, in the end, is what made their story so special. It wasn't just about romance, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't just about building a ranch and raising a family, though those were important. It was about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment when both of them needed something they didn't even know they were missing. It was about how one act of bravery can ripple outward through time, creating lives and love and legacy. 50 years of marriage, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren. A successful ranch that provided employment and sustenance for multiple families. A love story that inspired generations. All of it began because a cowboy broke ice with his fist to save a drowning woman, and she opened her honey-colored eyes and looked at him like he'd hung the moon. That's the story of Owen Vance and Beatrice Hartwell, the cowboy, and the woman he saved, who saved him right back. It's a story of courage and choice, of love and legacy, of building something lasting from a moment of crisis. It's a reminder that heroism doesn't always look like gunfights and glory, that sometimes it looks like breaking ice with bleeding hands because someone needs help, and you're the only one who can give it. And it's a promise that even in the hardest moments, even when the ice breaks beneath you and you're sinking into darkness, there might be someone willing to risk everything to pull you back into the light. Someone who will break their hands to save your life, who will hold you while you recover, who will stay by your side through 50 years and beyond. Someone who will love you so completely that even death can't diminish what you built together. That's the kind of love worth having, worth fighting for, worth remembering. That's the kind of story worth telling generation after generation, so that no one forgets what real courage and real love look like. That's the legacy of a cowboy who broke ice with his fists and the woman who became his whole world. Their story ended, as all stories must, but it ended well. It ended with a life well lived, love well given, and a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?